This morning, our message is going to be a little bit shorter because we have 7 people getting baptized today. Isn't that amazing? I don't know if y'all are cheering because the message is going to be shorter or because of the people getting baptized, but we'll take it either way. If you're visiting with us today at Lakeland, one thing that we do when someone gets baptized is we actually invite them in to the church and we film a video of their story. And they actually get to share with the whole church how God changed their life. And so today in first service, we're going to see 4 different video stories of individuals in our midst and what God's done in their life. So that'll be a big part of our message today. If you want to turn to Genesis chapter 42, that's where we're going to find ourselves this morning in God's word, Genesis 42. God's doing some amazing things here at Lakeland, amen? This is our 5th baptism service in the last 8 months. That's wild. And we're just all over the church. We're just seeing God bring about blessing. And I just want to pause and just to say all glory to Jesus for what he's doing. Only God could be changing lives like this. It's really special. Who here likes biographies? You'd say like, I'm a big, yeah, I knew there was a lot of you out there. Okay. For about 5 years, I read a biography every month. So I read probably 60 biographies, and from presidents to musicians, athletes, pastors, you name it. I just got really into biographies. And one of my favorite biographies that I ever read was called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom and her sister Betsy, they lived in Holland during World War II. They were Christian women, and they saw what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people. And upon seeing this, Corrie and Betsy began to take in Jewish people into their home. And this continued for years until one day they were found out and discovered. And once the Nazis found Jewish people in their home, Corrie and Betsy were actually sent to a concentration camp to work. Most of the book is these traumatic, horrifying experiences that Corrie went through as she was at Ravensbrück concentration camp. In fact, while she was at Ravensbrück, her sister Betsy died right before the soldiers were able to rescue them from the concentration camp. In the years following the war, Corrie ten Boom began to go from church to church, and she preached about Jesus and she preached about forgiveness. And on one Sunday, Corrie ten Boom is sharing about the power of forgiveness, and as the service ends, a man walks up to the front to talk to her, and she immediately recognized this man. You see, he was a German soldier from Ravensbrück concentration camp. He had tortured Corrie, and he was a part of seeing her sister die. All these emotions started to flood Corrie's mind. What's she going to say to him? Fortunately, the soldier, he spoke first. He said, Corrie, I need to ask for your forgiveness. Since the war, I've become a follower of Jesus, and I recognize the horrible things I've done. I've come here today to say I'm sorry. She's faced with an impossible decision. She had just finished preaching a message on forgiveness. And now this man comes up to her and asks her to actually act on what she's preached. And in her book, The Hiding Place, Corrie mentions this specific moment. This is what she says in her book. She said, I stood there with coldness clutching my heart. Forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that. Forgiveness is an act of the will. And the will can act regardless of the temperature of the heart. I prayed a simple prayer. I prayed, help, Lord. Lord, I will lift my hand and you supply the feeling. And mechanically, I stretched out my hand to the man, and as I did, something incredible took place. A current which started in my shoulder raced down to my hand, and this healing warmth flooded my entire being, and I began to cry. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all of my heart. And for a long time, we grasped hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I have never experienced God's love so intensely as I did on that day. What an incredible moment in her life. How would you feel if you were her that morning? You're standing up in the front of the church and someone who's brought so much pain and trauma to your life comes walking up to you. Well, today we're in week 7 of a 12-week series, and if you're visiting with us today, I'll just try to catch you up a little bit. We're looking at the life of Joseph. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. They had thrown him into a cistern. They pulled him out of the cistern. They were intending to kill him. They pull him out, and they end up selling him as a slave. And now it's been over 20 years since Joseph has seen his brothers. We even saw last week that Joseph, now in Egypt, he's in a powerful position. He has 2 sons. His firstborn son is named Manasseh, which literally translates causing to forget. And he's saying, God has caused me to forget all the pain and suffering from my father's house. He started a new life. It all but seems that Joseph has moved on, and like Corrie ten Boom, Joseph is about to be confronted with his past and the people who have caused him so much pain. Last week, we saw at the end of our text that there was a famine all throughout the land, and it's caused Jacob to send the 10 brothers to Egypt. But Jacob's fear is he keeps Benjamin back home with himself, the youngest. So the 10 older brothers are on their way to Egypt, and that's where we find ourselves today in Genesis chapter 42. So if you want to grab your Bible, we're going to start in Genesis chapter 42. We'll start in verse 6. In Genesis 42:6. Now Joseph was governor over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where do you come from?" he said. They said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and he said to them, "You're spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." Let's pause. So this is literally like an epic scene from a movie. 20 years have passed. Joseph recognizes the brothers. The brothers don't recognize Joseph. Joseph looks completely different than the younger brother that they remember. First of all, he's clean shaven. He'd shave his head. He shaved all of his facial hair. He's acclimating to Egyptian culture. He's wearing fine linen. He's wearing jewelry. And so the person standing in front of these brothers is not the annoying, prideful little brother that we remember when he was 17 and he was sharing his dreams with them. Joseph now speaks the Egyptian language, and he's immersed in their culture. He's married, and he has 2 Egyptian sons. But the last time that he saw these brothers, their intention was to kill him. And they sold him as a slave. They betrayed him, and this is the first time now that Joseph sees them again. I could imagine Joseph, maybe like Corrie ten Boom, pausing, taking a deep breath, and whispering the same prayer that she prayed. Help. God, help me right now as I interact with these men who have betrayed me, my dear brothers. Well, let's look what happens. Joseph accuses them of being spies. Let's go to verse 10. Verse 10, they said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We're all sons of one man. We're honest men. Your servants have never been spies." He said to them, "No, it's the nakedness of the land that you've come to see." And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here." He continues in the text. He basically comes up with this plan. He says, "This is how you're going to prove to me that you're being honest. You're going to send one of your brothers on the 250-mile journey back to Canaan. He's going to get your youngest brother. He's going to bring your youngest brother here, and the rest of you will be in prison until he returns." That's the original plan that he lays out. And then he throws all of the brothers in jail for 3 days. What's going on here? And as I read this text, I just think, is Joseph bitter? Is he lashing out at his brothers for what they did to him? He accuses his brothers of being spies 3 times, and then he throws them in prison for 3 days. Well, most commentators believe that Joseph was not bitter. He was not acting out. Rather, it suggested that Joseph was trying to get information from his brothers, and he was trying to discern if they've actually changed. You'll find it interesting that every time Joseph accuses them of being a spy, he gets more information. The first time he says, "You guys are spies," they say, "No, we're literally in a famine. We're here to get food." That's a very simple response. Then he accuses them a second time. And they say, "We're 12 brothers, the son of one man in Canaan. The youngest is back home with dad, and one of the brothers is no more." So now Joseph knows that Benjamin is alive. He knows that his dad is alive. He knows Jacob's alive. He's learning more information about the family. We see in verse 9 that Joseph remembers his dreams from Genesis chapter 37. A few Bible scholars note that Joseph would have recognized that only 10 of his brothers had bowed to him, but when he dreamed the dream in Genesis 37, it says that the 11 brothers bowed to him. So there might be a world in which Joseph's devising this plan to see the fulfillment of the dream and going, "We need to get Benjamin back here to fulfill the dream that I had when I was a young boy." We also see in Genesis 43, in the next chapter, Jacob and the sons are having an argument. Now, what's fascinating is the sons actually tell Jacob about this very conversation that we're reading. Look at what the sons tell their father Jacob. Genesis 43:7. "The man kept asking us questions about our family," they replied. "He asked, 'Is your father still alive? Do you have another brother?' So we answered his questions." The brothers are going back to Jacob and they're like, "Look, it was weird, Dad. We answered his questions. What do you want us to say?" And so this gives us even more insight into the fact that while Joseph is interacting with his brothers, he's trying to figure out, is my dad still alive? Is my younger brother Benjamin, is he still out there? Did you betray him too, like you betrayed me? Or is he still out there as well? And so we begin to see a strategy unfold that Joseph wants to bring his youngest brother back to Egypt. And he's going to test his older brothers. Well, again, we see the original plan is he's going to send one brother to get Benjamin and bring him back. But all of a sudden, Joseph's plan changes. And we see that in verse 18. So the brothers had been in prison 3 days. And on the third day, Joseph says to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you're honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody, and let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified and you shall not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "In truth, we're guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Then Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." And they did not know that Joseph understood them because there was an interpreter between them. Let's pause. God is using profound circumstances to bring healing to Joseph, to bring healing to his brothers, and there's a lot to unpack in this text. But I want to start by just talking about the weight of guilt that we carry. Let's look at verse 21 again, Genesis 42:21. This is the brothers talking to each other. Then they said to one another, "In truth." So I want to look at those first two words, "in truth." You cannot be healed from a story that you're not willing to tell. We can't be healed from a story that we're not willing to share. Last weekend at the men's retreat, it was such an incredible time to see 53 men from Lakeland gathered together, being vulnerable with each other. And if I could give a posture for the entire weekend of the men's retreat, it was right here. Just men humbling themselves before God, being vulnerable before the Lord, and being vulnerable before each other, going, "I don't have what it takes in my own strength to be a good husband, to be a good father, to love Jesus well." And we submitted ourselves to the Lord. And I look at the first two words in Genesis 42:21, these words, "in truth." It reminds me of the phrase, "to be honest." To be honest, we're guilty. We're guilty for what we did to Joseph all those years ago. Are you being honest with the parts of your life that you share with the people around you? Do you take the mask off and be a full, transparent, vulnerable individual with those closest to you in your walk with God? The brothers continue. They say, in truth, we're guilty. The first step towards repentance is acknowledging and taking responsibility for one's own guilt. And notice an interesting phrase here in this verse. We see it 3 different times. It's the word we. We are guilty. We saw the distress of his soul. We did not listen. The brothers didn't blame their father Jacob for making Joseph his favorite son or showing favoritism to Joseph. They didn't blame Joseph for being proud or arrogant. They didn't diminish their wrongdoing by going, we were younger back then, we didn't know any better. They used the right pronoun when they agreed together and they said, we are responsible. Bible scholar H.C. Leopold, in his commentary on the book of Genesis, he says that this self-admission of guilt was the only acknowledgement of sin in the book of Genesis. It was mind-blowing to me as I started to try to figure out another point in the book of Genesis where someone said the phrase like this, we are guilty. I am guilty of sin. And what I saw in the book of Genesis is just a pattern of people blaming. Adam blaming Eve. She gave me the fruit. Eve blaming the serpent. The serpent deceived me. Sarah blaming Abraham for Hagar. Jacob blaming Laban for deceiving him, and Laban blaming the customs rather than owning up to it. This constant pattern of sin, but then this constant pattern of blaming when we're caught in our sin. And what we see in this text, even here, is in Genesis 42:22, we see Reuben blaming. Right? In verse 22, Reuben, he looks at his brothers and he goes, did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? He's wiping his hands clean of this and going, this isn't my fault. And even Reuben is seen in this pattern of blaming. And he claims, you didn't listen to me, and now there comes a reckoning for his blood. We see the brothers confess that they're guilty. This crime was more than 20 years old, but they still felt the weight of it. I think sometimes time doesn't erase distress. We can experience these reminders of guilt in our lives. When you did something wrong and it literally feels like you're sick over what you've done. This is what happened with King David. Following his adultery with Bathsheba and his plot to have her husband Uriah killed. Look at what he says in Psalm chapter 32. This is Psalm 32, verse 3. He says, for when I kept silent, notice that first phrase, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, for day and night, your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. You ever been outside on a really hot day? You're like working in the yard and your body is literally just like wilting away. You're getting so exhausted just because of how hot it is outside. David is talking about his strength being dried up as by the heat of summer due to the fact that he kept silent and he didn't confess his sin. It literally wore down his body. It felt like his bones were wasting away. Have you ever felt this before? This sense of guilt that we feel is called conviction. And after 3 days in prison and a sudden need to deliver their younger brother to Joseph, the brothers are feeling convicted for something that they had done 20 years prior. I just want to say God is so gracious and so kind to bring this conviction to these young men. Joseph has a son that literally the name means God has caused me to forget. He's moved on. The brothers are 20 years removed from this betrayal. And God, in his love for both Joseph and for these brothers, brings them together in this moment to bring about healing and restoration in their lives. So what do we do if we're feeling the weight of that? Well, we look back at David in Psalm 32. And in the very next verse, this is what he says. He says, I acknowledged my sin to you. I didn't cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. Brothers and sisters, I want to say this morning, conviction is not God pushing you away from him. Conviction is God inviting you back to him. I think a lot of times we have this misinterpretation of conviction, and what happens is you begin to feel convicted, and that conviction turns into shame. And what God's actually doing is he's convicting us to bring about a confession, to pull us back into him, and to bring about healing in our lives. And what we see here in these brothers is God is bringing about a sense of guilt and conviction, so now he can restore and heal these brothers for something they did so long ago. And back to our text in Genesis 42, the brothers are talking to each other. They don't realize that Joseph understands them. That's just incredible. And Joseph is overhearing the sense that these men who've wronged them feel guilty for what they've done. And look what happens in verse 24. Then Joseph turns away from them and wept. And he returned to them and spoke to them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Joseph weeps. It's the first time. We're in week 7 of a 12-week series, and this is the first time in the story of Joseph that we've seen him weep. Didn't say that he wept when the brothers betrayed him. It didn't say he wept when he was thrown into prison after what happened with Potiphar's wife. This is the first time that says that Joseph wept. Now, we've got a few more chapters in the life of Joseph, and I want you to just take a moment and think, how many times do you think in the book of Genesis it says Joseph wept? 2, 3, 4, 5? Joseph wept 7 times in the next few chapters. I actually created a little graph here for you. If you want to do a study, you could take a picture of my exciting graph. I love graphs. If you're visiting today, I like making these. Do a study. Take a picture of this. You could go through each text, and you'll see each time that Joseph weeps throughout the book of Genesis, 7 times. We see, in a sense, just a reflection of the heart of Jesus. When we look at this, we know that Jesus, when he was on the earth, he wept. He was not distant from the pain of those around him. Isaiah 53 literally calls Jesus a man of sorrows. When he saw Lazarus, even before healing Lazarus, he pauses and he weeps for the loss of his dear friend. And Joseph steps away as he hears his brothers confess their guilt, and he weeps. Well, I'm going to summarize just kind of the remaining text for us this morning. We see the brothers, they got the plan in place. Simeon's going to stay with Joseph. The rest of the brothers are going to make the 250-mile journey back to Canaan. And what happens is Joseph ends up taking the money that the brothers had spent on the grain, and he commands that the money's put back in their bags, but they don't realize it. So the brothers have a bag of grain that's also filled with money. And as the brothers are making their journey back home, one of the evenings, one of the brothers opens his bag and he sees the money inside his bag. And they say, "What is this that God has done to us?" They're terrified over what's happened. And so they think only money is found in one bag. I'm surprised they don't open all the other ones, but they go all the way back home. They're with Jacob again, and they recount everything that's happened to Jacob. And as they're explaining all of this to their father, they open all of their bags. And in verse 35, as they emptied their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were afraid. They're freaking out. We didn't take this money. How did this get here? We're going to get accused. How can we go back and get Simeon when it looks like we just stole all of this money? We didn't do this. What are we going to do? And I want to look at verse 36. This is what Jacob says. Jacob, their father, says to them, "You've bereaved me of my children." The translation is literally, "You are robbing me of my children," to his sons. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me. The New Living Translation translates that last line, "Everything is going against me." And Jacob, he looks around and he just feels like everything is falling apart. Joseph's dead. Now Simeon's going to die because we can't go back for him. And now you're wanting to take Benjamin from me. D.L. Moody has this commentary with all of his notes that he would take in the margins of his Bible. And they kind of just took all of those and put them in a book. And in this text, in this very specific verse, Genesis 42:36, D.L. Moody wrote right next to the line that Jacob said, he said, think of a man writing about his life and God writing in a parallel column. I mean, think about it. Jacob is writing this story of his life. Everything is going against me. Everything is falling apart. And God is writing his own story in a parallel column that looks so different. Brothers and sisters, are you connected to the story that God is writing in your life? Are you writing your own story and God's actually writing something completely different? Are we aligned with the author who's writing the story of our life? This is what I would say the brothers would say if they were going to sit down and write their story. This would be the brothers' story. Simeon's going to die. The money in our bag is punishment for the sins that we did 20 years ago. We deserve suffering, we deserve death, and we deserve sorrow. That's our story. God writing their story would maybe look like this. The person that you hurt and betrayed, I'm preparing to pour out my love through his forgiveness. I'm going to show you a glimpse into the God who forgives even your very worst moments. So the guilt that you've held on to for 20 years, it will no longer define who you are. That's the story that God's writing over these young men. The Jacob story, to quote Genesis 42:36, Jacob's story would say, everything is going against me. Everything in my life is falling apart. Joseph's dead. Simeon's going to die now. I am a man of sorrow and a man of loss. God writing Jacob's story might go like this. Oh, Jacob, I am able to do far more exceedingly above all that you could ask or imagine. You believe your lot in life is sorrow and loss, but I'm going to bring joy beyond anything that you could ever dream of. Simeon will live, and you will be reunited with Joseph again, because I am the God of redemption and restoration. We've been talking this whole series about looking at life with 50-20 vision, Genesis 50-20, where Joseph looks at his brothers and he says, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. We look at life that way and we begin to align ourselves with the author, the true author of our story. Well, today we're in Baptism Sunday. It's a special Sunday today, and one of the things that I love about Baptism Sunday is you're going to notice there's so many different stories, different backgrounds, different ages, different circumstances. But the one common thread in these 7 individuals is the fact that they've experienced the love of Jesus. And their life has been changed by that. Here in the first service, you'll hear story of someone who wanted to play baseball in college. He was heavily recruited by a Christian school, but he had no idea that that was part of God's plan of revealing himself to our brother. He just wanted to go to a Christian school to play baseball. He had no idea that on the other side of that, he'd meet Jesus. Another story is someone who was invited to Lakeland by a few coworkers. He was working, doing Amazon deliveries with a couple friends. They invited him to come to Lakeland, and he found Christ here and is a new person. And second service, story of a young man who went to Alpha last year, said, I went for every vice the world had to offer, and it left me empty. And he gave his life to Christ this last year, and he's getting baptized today. A story of a junior high girl who dealt with high-level stress and anxiety, and in her words in the video, she said, when Jesus came into my life, the world was no longer a scary place. Maybe you're here today and you feel like Joseph's brothers. You feel like you're dealing with guilt in the past. I know there's some people in the room today. You're dealing with guilt from your past. And I just want to say this morning that Jesus wants to take your guilt and your pain, that does not have to define your life. The book of Romans says, there is therefore now no condemnation to those in Christ Jesus. Jesus has come to take that guilt. You can live a life free of shame. Maybe today you feel like Jacob. You feel like everything in the world is going against you. To you this morning, I want to say that Jesus said that he came to give life and life abundant. That abundant life is available to you. Place your hope in him. Align yourself with the story that he's writing in your life. And as we close our time this morning, I'm going to close with a quote from Corrie ten Boom, who we talked about at the beginning of this message. This is what Corrie said. She said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." This is a woman who spent years in a concentration camp, who had no idea if she would see tomorrow. Her future was very, very, very unknown. And she encourages us to not be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God.